Okay guys, so now hopefully you've conducted a hazard identification within your workplace. You've identified that there's some hazards exist in relation to, let's start with some basic ones, that students could get punched or kicked during an activity. Instructors could get exposed to biological hazards as a result of a blood spill. Students or instructors could get injured from weapons that have been used and are now damaged. So maybe let's say some wooden weapons, and they're splintered as a result of overuse. So anyway, we've identified a number of hazards, and the next stage is now conducting a risk assessment. So again, you'll see there's a template available within the course here for you to download, the risk assessment template. And what you're looking at is, okay, if this, how likely is it that this could happen? Okay, so let's look at the instance of someone getting struck. Could that happen every class, or is that just going to happen now and then, or is it going to happen maybe once a year? The potential there really is that someone probably going to get punched or kicked or hit every class. If you don't put appropriate controls in place, then it's pretty likely we're doing martial arts, we're practicing kicking, punching, blocking, grappling, whatever it is your style focuses on. There's a strong likelihood that someone could get punched or kicked, whether you mean the two or not. Then we've got to look at if that happens, what's the resultant outcome, okay? So if we're just doing some light punching drills on a shield and someone was to not hold the shield properly and the punch missed and hit someone, well, the injury there's probably fairly low compared to perhaps we're practicing flying kicks in our children's class and we're expecting 5-year-olds to hold the kick shield bag. Now, I know that's probably a little bit extreme, but I'm trying to portray an example here of what controls are you putting in place, what's the consequence. If our little kids are holding kick shields and someone does a flying kick, they're going to get injured. So we've got to then look at, okay, what controls do we need to put in place? The same goes for throwing activities. If we're throwing without mats, then there's potential that someone can get hurt. If we're throwing and the students have only just begun to learn break falls, then there's a higher risk of them being injured than opposed to students who have been doing this for a longer period of time and have good break falls. So we've got to then look at what controls can we put in place. Now, you'll see there's a hierarchy of controls with how we actually approach risk assessment and risk control. So based on this hierarchy of controls, you need to decide what the most appropriate control measure is to put in place. Now, that can be anything from as simple as a set of instructions, some sort of guidance that this is how we do things here, to the most extreme where something might be, we're actually not going to do this, okay? The risk is too great. Basically, if we do this, there's a very high likelihood that someone will be injured, so we're not going to do that activity. And an example there is live blade training. There's very few activities now that would be done with live blades, whereas even 10 years ago, clubs were still practicing a lot of live blade training. And of course, it's as a result of people being injured that community standards and what people expect change. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying you can't do any live blade training, but I'm obviously saying it's a risk. There's a risk that someone can get severely injured, and so we have to have suitable controls in place to minimise the chance of that happening. And that's all risk control and risk assessment is about, okay? It's about having a look at the activity or the circumstance that presents itself, making that assessment of, okay, what could happen if something goes wrong, and what can we put in place to try and minimise that from happening, okay? So let's look at a blood spill example, okay? Blood spills are reasonably likely that at some point someone is going to bleed. And that's either from them getting hit or they bring an existing injury into the class. Band-Aid comes off and they bleed on your mats, okay? you know, you need to have a system in place, a process in place that includes wearing rubber gloves, using appropriate cleaning materials, you know, and following the guidelines from Sports Medicine Australia in dealing with blood spills and blood on things, because obviously, you know, it's not acceptable to leave blood on the mats and other people are having to train in that or through that, you know. So yeah, look, that's as simple as it is. I encourage you to, as I said, download the template, have a look through. We've looked very briefly at the hierarchies of control, and so you can start to now, based on the hazard identification you've already done, you can now start to do a risk assessment based on, you know, how likely it is that this might actually happen or something could happen, and look at the consequence of it. If this does happen, what's the consequence going to be? What sort of control do we need to put in place to try and minimise that, to control that risk? Okay. Good luck, and I shall see you in the next video.